Well, what happens is finally you enter the fourth turning, and with this lack of direction, lack of regulation, lack of cohesion, everything runs aground eventually, right? You become very vulnerable to crisis. And everyone has forgotten the habits of what you do to actually counter a crisis. So this is a whole problem every time you go into a fourth turning, is that every generation at that time, by the time you're entering a new fourth turning, every generation who has had any adult experience handling a crisis is too old to serve.
Okay. So Niel Howe is at it again, and I like Niel Howe. I think he's an important voice for our for this time, and I think that there's some utility to the idea of the fourth turning and these generational, these societal changes that kind of depend on generational factors. Everything that happens in history really depends on what the people participating in those events have experienced in the past. I mean, that's pretty common sense. But Niel Howe, in typical Beltway intellectual fashion, uh, he can't help but call for more regulation. More regulation, it would be it's that is a very dangerous statement to make, and it's giving people the wrong idea of what the real issues are today. So I just wanted to kind of destroy this argument completely in just a few simple graphs, and then I can maybe come to maybe let's say add to his prognosis. So this is a nice little graph I found really quick. Federal regulatory growth restrictions in federal restrictions growth over time, and you can see it's been a steady increase in federal restrictions. And this is the first graph I found. But if you go and find, there's people that have actually counted the amount of regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations, and that has ballooned in size over the past. Even the curve is even more parabolic for the actual number of regulations. Now, just so I'm being fair and not being, just to be fair here, I looked up number of government employees. I found a little chart here, and I'm surprised actually by this. The number of federal employees has actually remained pretty stable for the past. Let me see if it lets me. I wonder if it's going to let me look this up. Okay, so you can go here and you can look over. This is only going to 2009. I expanded this earlier, but it's not necessary. So this is the number of federal employees from 1982. We're only seeing the last 11 years or 12 years or so, from 1982 to 2021. And if you were to expand this, let me see if it works, because I wonder if it's going to ask me for, okay, no, it didn't ask me for like money or anything. You can see that the number of federal employees actually grows over time. Of course, during Reagan, spending and government expansion was out of control. And it continued to grow through the Clinton years. And then finally, we get to 2008, the great financial crisis, and it gets kind of stable. It doesn't really grow too much. So just to be fair, I'm going to put that out there. Now, my what I believe, and what I could probably prove if given enough time, if I felt like digging through this, would be that the role of contractors, federal contractors, there's probably a lot more federal contractors now than there are federal employees, or the growth of federal contractors, I'm sure, over the past 10 years has probably grown quite a bit. So that would be my explanation for this. And why do I say that? Why do I assume that? Because, as we know, government spending has increased substantially over this same period of time. Well, yeah, even during, especially in the last 5 years, especially during the Trump administration. And during the Obama administration, just to be fair, I don't know how much it grew. I suspect it did grow, but we know that over the past 5 years or so, federal spending has ballooned. It's gone crazy. We know that. Everybody knows that. Okay, so this idea that we need more regulation, I wish he would. I mean, I like Niel Howe, but I just wish he would stop saying this. It's a dangerous idea. It's giving people the wrong impression. We need less regulation, okay? Because what more regulation does is it concentrates power. It concentrates. The more regulations you have, the more power concentrates. That's why we have such high wealth inequality. Because what's happening is the regulations make it harder for, as we know, enterprises and firms to start up and compete with the larger firms. That's why larger firms love regulations. Larger firms don't necessarily fight regulation. If you look at the lobbying, a lot of times these larger firms in the various industries want more regulation because it secures their positions as the top dogs in the economy. So the problem is not enough regulation. Now, you could say it's bad regulation, misguided regulation, or corruption, and I would tend to agree with that more than saying we need more regulation. That's just bollocks, okay? But it doesn't surprise me that a Beltway intellectual would say that, bless his heart. It doesn't surprise me one bit. What we're seeing, though, I tend to think that what we're seeing is not a fourth turning per se. I think we're at the end of a much bigger cycle. So the fourth turning would be a short-term cycle that occurs within a civilization over time. And that civilization tends to reorder itself, as Niel Howe says, at the end of the fourth turning. What we're seeing now is a much bigger cyclical change, and that is it's an imperial change. It's a empire in decline. And the reason it's in decline is because power has been centralized in too few hands. And what tends to happen when power gets centralized in too few hands is the people who control the system act more and more with impunity. You see, it's impossible for a person to hold oneself accountable when no one else is doing it. And what we have now is we have a government that is unaccountable. We all know that they're embezzling money with Ukraine. The whole grift is sending money to Ukraine, and then it goes back through Ukraine, disappears. We lose track of the money, and it ends up back in the hands of people here and people around the world who are, political favorites of the people divvying out the cash in Congress. We know that. That's basically a known fact. Yet no one is held accountable. Yet the same people are reelected. So why would they reform themselves? Why would they? If you were able to steal money from an ATM machine, let's say someone left the ATM machine, a guy, one of these ATM attendants, he went to collect cash out of the ATM machine. He goes and has a cigarette break. You go in there, the thing's wide open, you take the money, and you leave. And you never get caught. What's going to happen? What are you going to do? If you're already so inclined to do that, and most people, as they say, the line between good and evil runs through all of us. All of us have the capability to do unethical and immoral things, some more than others. But there's no shortage of people throughout society at every level, whether you're talking in government or in the business world or on the streets. Everybody has that capacity. So back to my example. So you do that, you get away with it. What are you going to do if you are so inclined to be one to do that? You are going to keep an eye out and wait for that guy to come back again, okay? And then you're going to wait for him to take a cigarette break. And if he takes a cigarette break, you're going to go and take the money again. And then you're going to leave. And you're going to keep doing that more and more. You won't be able to help it. This is the basic survival instinct that exists within all of us as primates. This whole human exceptionalism thing. Oh, well, I'm not subject to my own instincts. I'm not subject to these animal instincts. No, this is nonsense. And the same goes true in the halls of power. If they're able to steal money, give it to their friends, do this whole kickback thing, and they don't get held accountable, they're going to keep doing it, and it's going to get more brazen and more bold, and eventually they're going to overstretch themselves. The pitchforks are going to come out and their heads are going to get chopped off. Now, things have to get a lot worse for that to happen. But we're at this point now where the United States has been on the rise through a few turnings now, starting actually, according to Niel Howe, we've been through three, and we've been through three fourth turnings or whatever. We start, between the founding of the United States and I guess this would be the third. Between the founding of the United States to the Civil War was the first instance. And then the second instance was World War II. So I guess we're at the third instance. Okay, so we've been through two of them already. And he says we're going through a third. But we're also going through a much broader cycle of centralization. The United States is founded in 1775, and then it continues to grow in power. The government expands over time, especially after the early 1900s, but it did throughout its history, much slower in the beginning, and then accelerating in the 20th century. And now we're at a point where there is too much power centralized at the top. And because there's too much power centralized at the top, those people are not being held accountable. They can act with impunity. They can fly around on a jet with a CIA, Mossad pedophile and then go around the world and kidnap women in Africa and then go to Malaysia and kidnap some women there, dump their bodies somewhere, Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Clinton, Bill Gates, these people. And then they can come home and you have the whole, and they're not held accountable. In fact, you have the whole apparatus of law enforcement and national security protecting them. So they can act with impunity, and they're going to do it more and more. And here's what I'm actually worried about. Think about this. I've been saying this to a lot of people, and it gets people thinking sometimes, people that are willing to listen. Okay, if the United States is willing to destroy a country like Ukraine just out of a military industrial complex grift, and their stated intention tacitly is to bleed Russia, attack Russia by proxy. And some people in DC actually believe that, but a lot of people don't. They understand that this is a money laundering scheme. Okay, and they're doing it and they're not being held accountable. Well, what's going to happen when it's already starting to happen? You saw Taiwan, I mentioned in another video, their entire ruling party got wiped out in a big local election throughout Taiwan because the people of Taiwan said, we're not going to end up like Ukraine. And what happens when all around the world people start rejecting United States diplomatic and fiscal aid because they know that it comes with a caveat of, we're going to destroy your country? What's going to happen then? What's going to happen when the power structure here in the United States can no longer do what it did to Ukraine to anyone else? What's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. They're going to turn inwards, okay? When they have nobody left to exploit throughout the world, they're going to start doing the same sort of shit here. And people should be aware of that. And that's going to happen. It's happened before, happened in Rome, happened in all of the major empires that fell apart. Spain, Netherlands, Great Britain. They always end up turning inward on themselves because they have no one left to exploit overseas. And that's when I think, and I think, it seems to me like maybe people up there realize this, that, if they pulled what they pulled in Ukraine, over here, something like that, obviously they wouldn't last too long, right? But eventually they're going to be forced to, because, let's go back to the ATM example. So then, you come back a third time to the ATM, waiting for the guy to come. The guy comes, but he doesn't take a smoke break. In fact, he draws his gun out. He's looking around. He realizes that someone's going to rob this if he doesn't keep his, keep it. Maybe it's a new guy, and this new guy, because the other guy got fired, and the new guy's like, I'm not going to go take a smoke break. What are you going to be inclined to do then? Well, you're not going to rob that ATM. So what are you going to do? You're going to go rob another ATM or a person or what else, but you're going to try and rob somebody else. You're not going to say, oh, that ATM is maybe I should just get a real job now because, this ATM is no longer easy pickings. No, that's not what you're going to do if you're so inclined to do those things in the first place. You're going to find something else to rob. And eventually you're going to get caught, and you're going to go to jail. And the same thing is true with the regime. They're going to keep on acting with impunity, and eventually they're going to do something. I suspect they're going to do something really, really shitty here in the United States, where they're going to start doing things. Probably it's going to be a slow drip, a slow trickle. And eventually people are going to be like, these guys are assholes. Let's get our AR-15s out and let's take care of this matter. And, people say, I love the argument, oh, well, the government has F-16s and they have tanks. Well, so did the U.S. government when they tried to occupy Afghanistan, okay? No regime in history has ever been able to defend themselves from a widespread revolt. And that's because the regime needs the people. It lives off of the people, right? So if the people en masse start to revolt, there's little they can do. I mean, they can try and make an example out of a group of people and massacre them, maybe carpet bomb a city. That's only going to make the rebels more pissed off. And then they're going to realize, hey, we got nothing to lose now. So, it's not possible. So these people realize that. I think what's happening also is this is kind of, maybe a lot of people in the halls of power here in the power structure realize that the jig is almost up. That's why, look what they just did in Ukraine. They just passed a huge Ukraine bill right before the end of the congressional session. That's called the looting phase. We're in the looting phase. So, and I get a general gist. I have a general feeling that the population as a whole has become really jaded. And that'll give the regime a little more impunity for a while. But eventually, they're going to go and they're going to try and they're going to come up to like Central African Republic and they're going to be like, hey, we want to help you, Central African Republic. And Central African Republic's going to say, holy shit, no way, dude. Because we saw what happened to Ukraine. We saw what you tried to do to the president of Uganda. We're not going to do that. The Middle East, nobody in the Middle East wants anything to do with us anymore. I mean, we're running out of countries to exploit at this point. The United States empire is crumbling. No Niel Howe. More regulation is not going to stop it. We may be in a fourth turning right now, but we're also in an imperial decline. And it makes sense that the two would coincide. But the difference between this turning and the last turning is we are not going to reemerge stronger. Eventually, we might reemerge better, but we are going to also reemerge weaker. Okay, the era of ubiquitous U.S. power is over. And by the end of this century, it could be a really nasty imperial decline. You could look at what happened to Rome. Rome fell apart. By the 5th century, Rome was in shambles. The city of Rome itself. People were dismantling the Colosseum to build, for building materials. That's why the Colosseum's half gone. You had what was called the Dark Ages. Now it's a little controversial of a name because in many places the Dark Ages weren't really dark, especially in the Arab world. This is Niel Howe. Niel Howe's great, and the Fourth Turning is great. But I don't think it's going to play out like it did in World War II or the Civil War. History rhymes, doesn't repeat. People like the certainty. People like to feel certain and feel secure about what's going to happen. So they like Niel Howe because they're thinking, oh well, okay, we're going to go through some hard times, and then we're going to be better on the other side. Not necessarily. I mean, Britain. Look at Britain now. Britain basically was in decline starting around World War I. World War I was kind of what broke the back of Britain. It kind of, stumbled through the 30s and World War II. And then in the 1950s, huge monetary and fiscal crisis. And it's been stagnant to declining ever since. So, yes, Niel Howe, maybe we are in a Fourth Turning, but we're also in a general imperial decline. And it has to happen. Like I said, the regime is going to act with impunity until the pitchforks come out. And when the pitchforks come out, at first they'll think in their minds they got enough power to stop this. They're so powerful. And then they'll realize what every corrupt and incompetent regime that's faced this situation has come to realize in the past. And that is, holy shit, this is the end of the road. Okay, so that's my take on it, but I love Niel Howe. He does correctly state that the boomers are garbage, basically. And they're going to want to keep the system intact at least until they ride off into the sunset, as we know. But as far as, more regulation, come on, man. Stop saying that. Just stop saying we need more regulation. We don't need more regulation. We need less regulation. We need the power structure to fall apart, and we need to start over. And like I said, if that happens, that doesn't mean we're going to go back to being the most powerful country in the world. And that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. How much do, we benefit from it, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Great Britain used to be the dominant global power, and it's still an okay place to live, outside of the weather and the food. So that's it. I am out.